thank you everyone for attending the Ring at Canada Coaching and Officiating webinar series. We are very, very excited to get started here. Before we get started today, I would like to acknowledge the land on which I am this evening is the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. This territory acknowledgement is a way that we can insert an awareness of Indigenous presence and land rights into everyday life. It is a subtle way that we can recognize the history of colonialism, understanding the long-standing history that has brought us to reside on this land, and to seek to understand our place within that history. This is a current and ongoing process, and we do need to build a mindfulness in our present participation today, which is why we choose to talk about it at the beginning of our presentations. Now, to get started with a little bit about the session, there are going to be some resources provided throughout the session, like the session recording that I've let you guys know about. In addition to this, following the session, we'll be sending out a relevant Tough Calls resources. That'll include like a link to the rulebook as well as a link to the game clips that we use to review today. In addition to this, it will also include registration for upcoming webinars. Please register for those. We appreciate it, as well as a post question form and a session feedback form. We do want to hear from you, so please do fill those out. And we do understand that time today is limited. So if we're not able to get fully to your questions, this is a really good place for us to kind of keep that conversation going. I'm going to do a little tiny bit about me, just so you know who you're kind of talking to on the other side of this screen here. So my name is Hannah Woodman, and I'm the new program coordinator at Ring at Canada. I currently reside here in beautiful, rainy BC, where we're completely flooded and barely have any power, but it's great. And I'm really excited to kind of bring my lens of an athlete in Ring At for 17 years, as well as working at the provincial office, to this topic today and to my work at Ring At Canada. I'm not 100% the expert on officiating, but that is why we have Rob and Iris here to speak with us today. So just a little bit about the session today. I see all of your beautiful faces, so thank you so much. If you are comfortable, we would love it if you can switch your camera on, just to kind of have some collaboration and conversation between us. In addition to this, throughout the session, as we've mentioned, we'll be reviewing some game footage, and we do want to kind of have some conversation around these clips, some like questions, comments. We want to have some discussion about these calls and like all of those things. So with that in mind, please do use the chat and unmute function to kind of bring up your comments and pose any questions that you may have throughout the session. Don't feel like you need to wait until the end to bring anything up. We are pretty full today, so to unmute yourself, if you could just use that raise hand function on your Zoom bar there. Chat me if you're having any issues finding it there. But if you just use that raise hand function, then we'll be able to let you know when to unmute yourself and kind of add your comments there. If you are having any tech issues, please do let me know and I will do my best to help you. You can reach me over email or just in the chat, whatever works best. And as we mentioned, the session today is being recorded and that will be posted on the website as well as available through our YouTube following the session. If any of us are coaches as well as officials, which I know that many of us are since we wear so many hats here in Ring At, this session is eligible for PD points. So if you let me know your NCCP number, or you can register for self-directed study once that is available in the locker. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce our speakers for today, Iris and Rob. I'm going to hand it off to them to tell you a little bit about themselves before we kind of get into the game footage here.
So I'll go first. This is Iris Todd. I've been officiating for over 40 years, officiated at CRCs, at Canada Games, and I think most everybody here knows that I do a lot of supervising now. I still am active on ice, just not at the national level. I do a lot of officiating in the Edmonton area, and still love it too much to stop. Over to you, Rob.
Thanks, Iris. So I'm Rob Drury. So this is my 30th year, I believe, as an official, also an evaluator and instructor. I have had the opportunity to officiate at a few World Championships, the Canada Winter Games, the CRCs as well as a number of provincial events. I've also taken on the role since 2009 as Ring at Canada's rulebook editor. So doing the deep dives into the rules, and just love to be on the ice. I love the speed of the game, but also value being able to give back to and help with the development of other officials, so that as those of us get older, there's a next generation to come up behind us and keep the great game going.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. So we're going to jump into this first video here. Let me know if we're having any issues viewing it or hearing the volume. We're going to run it once in regular time, and then Iris and Rob will kind of do some comments or let us know to play it back. And then we can also play it back in some slower time to see if we can see anything extra. Also, most of these clips are from Canada Winter Games 2019. Yep, Iris.
Actually, I was just going to say, did we want to preface that a bunch of these clips are from Canada Games, and that we'll be, excuse me, just watching a bunch of different video clips and then to having the discussion.
Yes, for sure.
Sorry,
for sure.
Carry on.
No, all good. So we are using the 2019 Canada Winter Games clips here. So these are also available all on YouTube and on the Canada Games website. So these are kind of banked there and archived there. So they're also available for view following the session. The individual clips will be shared following the session as well. So this is our first one here. This is a major penalty.
But
So that one was another major there.
And this is an example of some of the more, I mean, it became more obvious when you're watching it slowed down, but when you're watching it full speed, some of the more subtle things that you need to watch for especially when you're getting to higher level games. Because this wasn't a big put her shoulder into you or a big body contact. This was an extension of one hand into the small of her back to take her down. But still would constitute body contact. And because it was from behind, it was right into the small of her back. That really constitutes that major penalty. But really to articulate when we're watching those calls, especially at the AA level and certainly at the 18+A level as well, they become much more subtle in some of the things that they're doing. So you have to be more aware when you're watching for things and the calls that you need to make. Yes, we've only got a split second to make these decisions, but if you are thinking about it going in, about making sure that you're staying focused, that you're watching for the little things and not just the big bangs, it really helps you to identify what the intent was, as well as if they are doing those little actions that can have a big outcome.
Well, and I think that it just to add even to that, like, this was a push in the back, but I think initially we saw a lot of people, going across the top of the triangle, and there was some of the guiding with the stick on the hip or the hand on the hip and stuff like that. And then sometimes the pushing down, but all of that seems to be happening all over the ice now. So it's not just it's not just when they're trying to crash the triangle. It's like going just anywhere on the ice, a player going for the ring out in the middle of the ice and the checker just being that close, and it's kind of like, I'll just give a little shove on the hip. and puts the girl down so that she can't get the ring. And it's not always from behind. Sometimes it's just from the side, but it's still a penalty that we need to be very, very aware of, so that we can make those calls. And I think that the other thing that we need to consider, and I know we have people on this call that are of all different levels of officiating. I think the other thing that we need to keep in mind is that the ring is going to be okay all by itself. We don't need to watch the ring. We need to watch the bodies. And so a loose ring is a loose ring, but what are the people that are going to the ring doing to each other? So we really kind of need to think about focusing on the players going to the ring versus just the ring itself. I think when we get ring focused, that's when we have a good chance of missing these calls, because we didn't see what the players did, we just saw the ring. So we need to open up our field of vision and be looking at the players going to the ring and what are they doing to.
And just to speak to Paul's question about body contact versus elbowing. Elbowing, in that particular instance, typically you would see elbowing where they are in closer quarters. They're extending the elbow behind to a player behind or to beside them, or potentially getting it up into the head. That was more maybe forearm, maybe hand, and then the extension of the arm. Typically an elbowing penalty, the arm would stay bent as opposed to the extension that we saw on that one. Not to mention, it's been years since I've called an elbowing penalty, so it doesn't happen very frequently.
Now we're moving on to the next one, right, Hannah?
You're muted, Hannah.
That makes sense. Sorry, I said yes, we're moving on to the next one. Would you like to say anything about the last one before we move on? Okay, sounds
No, I
good.
think we're good. Thanks.
Seconds left in this period. Sigala will try to sneak one past McKenzie. No luck. And she goes down hard. That was just, it was luck. And she goes down hard. That was just, it was past. McKenzie, no luck. And she goes down hard. That was just it. 15 seconds left.
Would we like to replay this one? Are there any, do we want to ask everyone what they saw, what their thoughts are?
Yeah, I think this is probably a good one to get people's opinions on, and
Okay.
then we can.
Okay, sounds good. Can we ask everyone in the chat to kind of add in what they saw here for this call? I'll play it a few more times as everyone can start to add some stuff into the chat here.
And if you can leave it running for one more second so
For
that
sure.
you can see the official signal so that they know
Yeah.
what was called as well.
Sounds good.
Sneak one past McKenzie, no luck. And she goes down hard. That was just, it was, as the third period ends. Major penalty coming up. Why? Just why?
The camera moved right at the perfect moment for us to catch it, but maybe it's a trick question, so you don't get the answers yet.
And you gotta love the commentators.
Why? Yeah, I know.
15 seconds left in this period. Sigala will Try to sneak one past Mackenzie, no luck. And oh, and she goes down hard. That was just, it was as the third period ends.
Because so we have a boarding question mark, cross check question mark, good call, and we like the why from the analyst. We have major body, major body, major body.
So we all know that a
Major
major was
cross-check.
called because they told us that.
Mhm.
And I think that in this, when, like, we know we have some people that are saying major body, we have some people that are saying cross check. We have, I think there was one that said boarding.
Mhm. Mhm.
But, and I think the one thing that we have to think about in this is we're seeing the camera angle, and there would have been an official that was right along the boards. Just the way the dynamic is, that they were on the bench side. So they would have the best view of what truly happened and what the contact was to know if it was stick or arm that caused that player to go down. And that's going to potentially determine, well, I shouldn't say potentially, that's going to determine whether you're going to call cross-checking or body. And then there is the factor of the player going into the boards. So when some people that are saying, oh, major cross check, well, potentially, depending on where the stick was it stick or was it arm that caused the person to go down? And I think the other thing that we can look at there is the player went down and then slid and then went into the boards. So I think my tendency would be to be calling a body contact or a cross check. And then depending, like I said, depending on whether it's stick or arms that caused the player to go down.
Yeah, and it's definitely difficult to see, but after we've watched it about 20 times, you may have noticed that the stick of the Quebec player was actually on the inside of the Nova Scotia player, and goes sliding along the boards out the other side. So it was likely that she didn't make much contact with a cross check, that she actually had her hand around her a little bit to have the stick go in that motion. Obviously, we've watched it over and over and over again, but that would lead me to think that it's more of the body that was initiated, but certainly the camera angles are difficult to see. The other thing to keep in mind is the official making the call has almost the exact opposite perspective that we do from where the camera angle is. So his angle onto the players may even seem like a contact from behind, even though our angle is very different. And that's where you have to recognize that this is why coaches and players may not see the same thing that we do based on where we are and they are on the ice, because what you see on a particular play is going to be very different, because he's got that straight view on the blue player, I think that's Quebec, and so is going to see that very differently than the angle we're looking at from where the camera is. So that's where we have to recognize that when people are getting upset about a call, that we can acknowledge that perspective changes depending on how you see the particular play, and it can look very different from different angles.
Thanks, Rob, for that. My question is because when I first initially saw it, to me, it looks like it's from the side. And as the stick from the defender goes up the boards, like, to me, it looks like it's a side hit, not. So that's why from this angle, me personally, I think it's more of a two because it's from the side, but I would agree that whoever's at the net would have a different view, and whoever's up the boards would also have another view.
We have something in the chat here from Serge saying a little chat with our partner before making the call, question mark.
Certainly if they were both up on it, that may be appropriate. I don't know that the partner on the boards necessarily went up on it. We can't see. But at very least, I mean, the official at the net made an immediate signal. So if you were both up on it, you may want to make at least some eye contact and have the nonverbal communication with your partner. But if you are both up on it, then you could have that discussion. There's also if the official at the net A is the only one up on it, you wouldn't typically go to your partner on a penalty call if they aren't up on it as well. But you could if you're both up on it.
Well, and I think in further to that, if you both have your arms up for the penalty and one person is kind of like, ooh, this is kind of like, ooh, this is 4. And then your partner is the one that blows the whistle to stop play and they signal body contact, then that is the time that you need to have that conversation and maybe say like, are you thinking 4 on this? Because I definitely am. And then they might kind of go, oh yeah, the contact was from behind, it should be 4. So I think that those conversations need to definitely happen, but I 100% agree with Rob. If only one referee has their arm up to call the penalty, then you've got to make your call and it's either 2 or it's 4, or you make your signal and away you go. You can't have that conversation with your partner that didn't even have their arm up.
Okay, anything else to say from the group or in the chat about this video? I'll leave it for like a few more moments here to see if there's anything else about this one. Okay, we're going to move on to the next video here.
That ring. Now Liberté. Block shot. McGrath and body flying in front of her. That was good body positioning by McGrath. Oh, and a bad turnover here. This is McGillen. And penalty coming up to Quebec. Almost a costly turnover. That will end the player advantage. Out of that ring. Now Liberté. Block shot. McGrath and body flying in front of her. That was good body positioning by McGrath. Oh, and a bad turnover here. This is McGillen. And penalty coming up to Quebec. Almost a costly turnover.
And we'll watch the natural replay this time.
Advantage.
So Hannah, can we just remind people there's still a number of people that have their cameras turned on that is potentially resulting in the choppiness of the video when we're playing it. So if people can please turn their cameras, reminder to just please turn your cameras off so that it may help with the playing of the videos. Thank you.
Sounds good.
That ring. Now Liberté. Block shot. McGrath. Oh, and body flying in front of her. That was good body positioning by McGrath. Oh, and a bad turnover here. This is McGillen. And penalty coming up to Quebec. Almost a costly turnover. That will end the player advantage. Yeah, and you know what? That came from that really bad turnover just right in the middle. Players just have to be more aware of Now Liberté. Block shots. McGrath. Oh, and body flying in front of her. That was good body positioning by McGrath. Oh, and a bad turnover here. This is McGillen. And penalty coming up to Quebec.
So there were a number of things going on in this clip, if you were able to see it. Certainly at the beginning, down in the corner, there was a potential penalty. It was a very big non-call. I'm trying to think back to the game because I didn't pick all the clips, but it was me on the ice again. So that play there, that really, there are a couple of things that come into play, and they were both going for the ring. They both got to that point, and in a 0-0 game, it was felt that it would be chalked up as a collision. Depending on the game you are in, it could, that first one of the players could have been seen as at fault for that initial collision down in the corner, because the Quebec player did get there first. So that certainly could have been a call. And then immediately afterwards, the Ontario player who was driving to the net, she got hit in the skates a little bit by the player in the back, and then finished off with the body contact. So really it was trying to determine what is going to be the best call to make. So yes, there was a bit of contact there that the question was asked about potential for a trip as well. But really, I don't see both the trip and the body contact. And I being on the ice, I would have to think how much of that trip was caused by the angle that the player was cutting at. So when she's putting herself into a position to cut across and is at a very steep angle, and any contact is going to potentially bring her down, that's something we're going to look at when it comes to tripping penalties and calls like in games like this. But the player who was coming towards her, it looked a lot worse than it really was, because the player was starting to fall, and then the Quebec player went up over top of her. But she was going to make that contact regardless, and that's really what we want to look at when we're looking at what was her intent. Did she have any intent to play the ring there, or was she just coming straight in to try and crunch that triangle down? And it was really determined that that player was just looking to crunch that triangle down, regardless of the impact that it had on the Ontario player.
And I think if, like, when I'm watching this in slow motion, it almost looks like when the Ontario player went to cut, I don't know if it was the stick that did anything to the player falling down. I think it was the skates. I think there was like skate to skate contact, but I don't know that, like, I think it was just kind of the dynamic of how it happened, that the skate to skate contact happened. I don't know if it was the stick as much as the skate. And I think when we go back to the thing in the corner, Rob, when you were saying about the Quebec player definitely got there first, take a look at what the Quebec player does with her body at the last second as well. She may have got there first, but she turned her body in a way that, because of the way the Ontario player was coming in, she almost put herself in the position to get hit. The way she swung her body around.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Others can agree or disagree, but she kind of put herself.
Yeah, and one of the chat questions was about a potential interference on the Quebec player down in the corner, because she definitely does. Yes, she got there first, but she did cut over in front at that very last second. So did she really have that time? Did she give her that time and space to cut in front of her to that degree, and then slam on the brakes? Not really. And we do look at the time and space when it comes to things like that as well.
Okay, so some stuff that we have in the chat are those non-calls are the toughest to sell to players and coaches. Any tip on how to explain it?
And really, it's you have to almost get into some of the how the play set up, and not just saying no, it wasn't, or something like that. You have to say both players were skating. When we originally watched that at full speed, it was almost both players are skating and they got there at the same time. So who are we going to place at fault for that, when we're either going to call both or we're going to call neither? Because yes, technically speaking, all players have the obligation to avoid contact. But in a game like this, we're not going to be calling both. So we chalk that up to a collision where they're both heads down going for the ring, that we are going to chalk it up to a collision. There are, this is some of the elite games that you're going to see. Would we make the same call on a Sunday night game, league game at home? Probably not, because it's going to, the game will just fall apart from that point on. We have to have the knowledge of the game we are in, and whether or not there's the understanding from the players and the coaches to say, okay, this is part of this level of the game, that this is not going to get called. If you don't call that, and in this case, call both players potentially on that Sunday night game, the game could well go downhill very, very quickly as they get up and start swinging sticks at each other, because they both feel that something should have been called. So it's that awareness of the game that you're in. So we're not saying that we've got a wide range of officials on this call, and we're not saying that in every game that would be a non-call. This particular game was the gold medal game at Canada Winter Games, and they tend to have more leniency, but they also have more understanding that some of the physicality is going to be allowed.
Okay, I saw a lot of comments here in the chat. Does anyone want to unmute themselves and say anything on top of that, or kind of articulate their comment out loud? This is like a good time to do it. You can go for it.
But I think, like Paul has put in the chat, that they're both trying to beat each other to the ring, and neither one of them really tries to avoid body contact. Definitely not. But then you get into, so is it an easy, like, when you take a look at, can you, if that penalty did get called and you took both of them, it's kind of like, well, you're both going for the ring and neither one of you tried to avoid body contact. So can you sell it in that regard? Absolutely. And I think that, Rob brings to the point of what this game was and what the score was, and how the players are going at it, and how hard they're going and how fast they're skating. And that was definitely a consideration in the non-call in this case, for sure.
Paul first, and then once you're finished up, Paul, we'll move on to Richard there.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that was my point. I think, like, yeah, I guess you could give both players a penalty, but I wouldn't recommend that, given that neither of them avoided body contact, and it wasn't really a deliberate play, and no one had an impact over the other because of it. So because they kind of wash each other out, I would agree to let it go. But that I would use body contact principles to explain it if I was asked, and those are the ones that apply in this case.
Awesome, thank you. Richard, do you want to add your comment as well?
Oh, yes, I totally agree with the non-call there, and I appreciate your explanation, Rob. And it goes to show that we have to adapt to, like you said, to the game we're officiating, and where we are, like you said, this is the gold medal game, so there is more room for players to play. Again, it's just to let everybody on that this session to understand that we're going to make decisions based on the game we are officiating. So thank you for the explanation.
Okay, anything else before we move along from this clip here? Also, just be advised that I know that we're having some issues with kind of the rendering of the videos. So it was working for some people to include the YouTube link with, it should have the correct bookmark attached to it. So I'll also be pasting the links in the chat if that's easier for you to watch the clip that way alongside our presentation. Emmanuel, would you like to go for it?
Yeah, it's just a comment about the chat. There's an interesting question by Melissa Lapalme, and I know we have like different level of referees on the ice, and I think it would be worth answering that question.
Which question are you referring to?
She's asking if the Quebec player would have already been in a defensive position.
Okay.
And the other player charging to the Quebec player, would that have been charging on Ontario?
So the question here is, if the Quebec player would have already been in a defensive position and the RO player charged into the RC player, would that have been a charging on the Ontario player?
Yes, it would have been if she had a set and defined position and the Ontario player continued into her. Absolutely, that would be a charge. But in this case, as we saw, the Quebec player was moving forward, and I think there was some question as well about the severity of the hit, and I think that's where we have to keep into perspective as well that it looks worse than it really was because the Ontario player was already falling down. The Quebec player wasn't intending to hit her with that force. It was really, she expected the resistance to be there, and when the Ontario player went down, she went down with her. So it looked, on the actual body contact penalty, it looked worse than it was because of the way the players fell, but I didn't think there was intent to hit her hard or anything. It was just, she ended up going down on top of her with her, which makes it look that much worse.
Well, and I think one of the other aspects of this is the player that ended up getting the penalty was the player that made the pass from the corner. So she traveled a long ways to make that hit. It's not like she was standing there and then just kind of stepped into this person. She skated into her. Like, she skated from the corner all the way to the middle of the ice, pretty much to make that hit.
She made the bad giveaway and had to make, she made the bad giveaway and had to make sure she wasn't going to give up that goal too.
And I think the other thing that we take a look at when we talk about body contact versus charging when there's action at the triangle, is sometimes we need to see and take into consideration where players landed at the end of everything. So in this case, the Ontario player is going towards the net, and the Quebec player body contact is like, even if the Quebec player had been, if the Quebec player had her position, would the Ontario player have gone over backwards like that without that force of the Quebec player coming at her? So sometimes we need to see where the bodies land at the end of everything, and it helps us to make a determination as to whether it's body contact by the defender or if it's a charge by the ring carrier. Typically a charge by the ring carrier, the player that was defending is going to be on her butt. And typically a body contact by the defender, the ring carrier is going to be on her butt going back in the direction that she came from. So I think that's one of the things that we can sometimes consider when we're taking a look at those body contact versus charging penalties, is where, and my terminology and what I always say, and some of you have probably heard this, where did the wreckage land? Where, like, what was the end result? Where did everybody end up? You get in, you get to be collision reconstruction people.
Okay, awesome. I think we're going to move on now from this video. I'll leave it up for a few more seconds here. If there's anything else, just feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat right now. Okay, and again, I'm going to add the link address into the chat because that's helping some of us here. So it is available in the chat. And we're moving on to the next video here.
Nobody knows where the ring is. It's still alive in the crease, and Dubé will give it to McGrath, who is knocked down. Yeah, no call on the play. Nobody knows where the ring is. It's still alive in the crease, and Dubé will give it to McGrath, who is knocked down. Yeah, no call on the play. What a save. Nobody knows.
And this might be another good one to get people's opinions on what they saw, and then we can walk through what we felt about it.
Okay, if everyone would just like to add into the chat, or feel free to raise your hand and unmute, let us know what you think you saw from this one. There wasn't a call made on this one. So as an official, what did you see?
Taking into consideration camera angle, etc., etc.
So we have player stated where the Ontario player was already positioned. We have time and space. Quebec tried to go through space that wasn't necessarily there. Then we also have someone who's surprised that this wasn't a tripping. Megan says stick is outstretched and the Quebec player decides to go through the small gap.
I think Steph Black picked up on what the referee saw as well on the ice, and the referee at the net had a very good view. But yeah, and Christy has said it as well. If we watch the red player's stick, where does it actually go once she gets past the Quebec goalie? And also looking at who got the ring coming out of that. So in this case, go ahead, Iris.
When it's real speed, you see one thing. When you slow it down, you can definitely, like, you definitely see that there was, like, the Ontario player, her stick is going to the ring, and the Quebec player definitely got the ring first, and then it looks like the Ontario player stabbed the ring as well. And when we watch the end of the play and the whistle blows and the direction signal is given, I think it kind of gives it away that it was second control red, and ended up being that the player went down and went down hard, but it was still second control. So that was and like I said, it was kind of like the stoppage of the play and then the pointing direction is kind of the giveaway as to what happened.
And the first time you watch it full speed, you may even think that there was some impact of body contact potentially there as well. But when we're looking at the direction, as Iris said, where did the wreckage land? The biggest impact is her going up over top of the Ontario player's stick. And if both sticks are in the ring, we're not going to be calling a tripping. So in that case, to answer Kurt's question, play was stopped for second and control.
Well, second control, and I think the ring is probably
the player ended up
the player at that point, and kind of hard to play the ring from down there.
Okay, anything else for this clip here before we move on to the next one? And again, the link address is just going in the chat to help you guys be able to watch along if that's working better for you and the video is rendering better that way. And just moving on to this next video here.
Have that pass. Rondo's getting after it, but there it is. Stronger than her. There it is. Still going. Finds the space for the shot, but good save by Gerardin. And now behind the play. And there it is. There it is. Still stronger than her. There it is. Still going. Finds the space for the shot, but good save by Gerardin. And now behind the play. And good call by the ref. She's going to give both Amarosian and Paradis a penalty for this. Just both of them, and yeah, there we go. Now Amarosian heading to the box, but good call by the ref. Both girls kind of battling back and forth.
So that was like a double interference there, and it just happens right in front of the net here. So I'll play it back again.
Have that pass. Rondo's getting after it, but there it is. Stronger than her. There it is. There it is. Still going. Finds the space for the shot, but good save by Gerardin. And now
I think one of the takeaways on this is really, it may change a little bit based on the tone of the game or even the tone of the shift on how aggressive they are getting. There'd been sort of some contact down low, and then they were getting a little frustrated. She ran into her in front of the net. Would we have necessarily called the BC player if the Manitoba player hadn't also grabbed her and they all ended up down on the ice? Potentially not, on just that initial contact, depending on the tone of the game. But certainly once the Manitoba player locked arms with her and dragged her down to the ice, I think it's a good way to send a message that we've now stepped over, you've both stepped over the line. And making that call to just get everything to settle down a little bit from escalating, because they were starting to go a little bit off the deep end.
So just on that note here of kind of like adjusting the line and kind of like keeping control of the game, one of the questions that we had gotten prior to the session was when to adjust the line and when to pull it back, and how to keep, like, how to use that to keep control of the game. Like, what are some tips for that?
And it is very subjective. It's very difficult to identify because it's more of a feeling where you can feel that you can feel the emotions are starting to escalate. If you start seeing players who are really driving hard, they're not making that same intent for the ring, that they're starting to initiate that contact first, that you can really feel a change in the game is the best way that I articulate it, that you say, okay, things are starting to escalate. You really need to pull it back in because something is going to happen. Not that we want to be looking for penalties, it's just a heightened sense of awareness. And it comes, unfortunately, it comes largely with experience when you start knowing that how players are acting on the ice. There are times you can see a player who's not around anywhere else, but the way they're carrying themselves has changed on a particular shift. Their demeanor is changing, and reading the players to understand, are they getting agitated? Are they escalating to a point that, okay, I need to pull this back in before something more severe happens? And having that understanding of the players and recognizing that change is really when you have to have to make that, okay, yeah, now we have to start with the quicker whistles or start with the penalty calls. And, you know, that's a discussion as well that you have with your partner on a stoppage. When you start to sense that, have that discussion with your partner, because they may not immediately realize it, but then you can both be watching for it and try and diffuse a potentially volatile situation.
Mhm. Mhm.
And there are definitely times where, like, there are times that it's just this one-off situation in a game as well, where these two players, they kind of went at it. They both got a penalty, but the whole rest of a game might not have any of that in it at all. It just ended up that there was the one situation, it was dealt with, and there was never anything else before that or after that. And so there are the one-off situations, but yes, there are the times that things just kind of start escalating. And I think it's important to that we be the ones that get that to try to rein things in and keep the game in control, versus the teams be the ones to kind of figure things out, and they end up changing their way of play. Like, we want them to change their way of play, but we don't want to let things go so far that we're not calling anything, and then the players start bringing it back in. We need to make sure that when things escalate to beyond a point, that we're the ones that are making that, taking control of that at those situations, and starting to call the penalties that need to be called, and sometimes all it is us verbalizing that much more as well, to try and keep things under control, to verbalize things that we're seeing, to try and have players stay off the body, play the ring, keep the sticks down. And sometimes those things can help de-escalate things as well.
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay, is there anyone would like to add before we move on from this video? And just adding on to Iris' point, I know that as a player, when a ref just simply tells me to keep my stick down or to play the ring, oh, I'm shaking in my boots, I'll do it. But that's not every player. That's not every player, but that'll make me do it for sure. We have a question here in the chat from Yvette. Could the Manitoba penalty have been holding instead of interference?
Absolutely, it could have been, because she does sort of grab her arm and lock it down. I think the interference penalty is being used in this particular case to send a bit of a message as well, that they're just, you know, they're not making any attempt to play the ring. They're just messing around with each other. So, you know, that can also send a excuse me, send a particular message as well at this level, where the players know, okay, well, yes, we're, you know, as opposed to saying, yes, I'm going to call that a hold every time, I'm going to call the other a body contact every time. There can be an opportunity to use the interference to both, to say you're both not making any attempt to play the ring, you're just playing each other, and we want you both off the ice.
Mhm.
Okay, anything else before we move on here from this video? Again, feel free to just unmute, raise your hand, or put it in the chat. And again, the link address is just going in the chat. And we're going to move on to this clip here.
On good lead pass, finding Scar. Now, that was a good shot. It's going to be major contract, major penalty coming up. On good lead pass, finding Scar. Now, that was a good shot. It's going to be major contract, major penalty.
Megan says to the back.
Yeah, and I think there were a number of things happening here. Yes, it was absolutely to the back. It was pretty clear to the back. But I would also say that I think it was also it was also intentional and aggressive, potentially deemed reckless. She certainly was not making any attempt to do anything but take that player down. So, you know, I think the major penalty is very clear cut. Yes, the question is, it's a little difficult to say whether she got the shot off. It certainly appears that she did before she went into the crease, which is why it wouldn't be a penalty shot, but certainly could have been, because although she was coming in at a bit of an angle, there weren't any players between her and the goalkeeper. So if she didn't get the shot off, it could have been a penalty shot. Now, I guess again, we've got a wide range of officials on the call. If it was a penalty shot, what happens with that penalty? Do we have anybody who wants to weigh in on that particular play? What would you have when you're calling that a penalty shot?
Still applies, still served.
Yeah, so the major penalty would still be served. So you would have a penalty shot plus the major penalty. And similarly, if she had actually scored on that shot, so yes, so it would be a 4-minute penalty plus the penalty shot, and the 4 minutes is fully served if we deem that she didn't get the shot away and she was on a breakaway. And similarly, if she scored on that shot, we would still be assessing the major penalty, because the goal does not nullify a major penalty.
So Kurt put in there so that for and the penalty shot, or it could have been for and the goal, and that's sometimes what makes it that tough call, is that wow, this is like, we're giving this, like, this team scored a goal or they're getting a penalty shot and the player still has to serve the penalty. Like, that's very harsh. And it's kind of like, well, but that's the rule. And it's that contact from behind, and which is automatic 4-minute major penalties are fully served. So yes, penalty and penalty shot, or penalty and the goal. So it's and that like I said, that's what can make it a bit of a tough call. I think the other thing that comes into play here, and we didn't necessarily keep the clip going to hear the commentators, but you see that there was another aspect to this, in that Manitoba had 4 in as well.
Here we can
the player
go for it, Iris. Sorry.
So just, maybe just play it and let it finish out completely, Hannah, to hear
Perfect.
that, and just but people can watch the Manitoba defenders all go in.
Yes, for sure.
Well, it could lead past finding Scar. Now, that was a good shot. It's going to be major cross-track, major penalty coming up. Oh, and I think there might be 2 calls on the play here. There's going to be another. Oh, is there? Yeah, there is 2 called on the play, because there is going to be a delay of game, because there was 4 in. So this is. Oh, and
So that was the other aspect here of that second penalty. So that second penalty of the delay of game does get called as well. So you take a look at, it's a 5-3 game. Even if it's a 3-3 game, there's 4 minutes left in the game, and be it 4 minutes left in the game or 14 minutes left in the game, there was still the 2 penalties, and one of them's a 4-minute fully served penalty. The other one is delay of game. So although that it's at a critical time, it could be at a very critical time of the game and it's a tough call, still has to be made. Both penalties need to be called. And I think Colin put in, did the shooter end up in the net? And did she hit the post as a result of the hit? So if we can maybe just go back and
Mm.
So yes, she does end up in the net. I'm not sure, Colin, if you're asking about the rule change that regarding the match penalty potential for that. Wouldn't apply here given that she slid in, whereas the match penalty is really intended for plays where they don't have an opportunity to protect or get some sort of adjustment in body positioning to defend themselves, which is the intent of that. So I'm not sure if that's your question, the reason for your question. Yeah. So because she slid in, it wouldn't be really the match penalty ruling is when they go directly in with no opportunity to protect or defend themselves, even by twisting, getting a shoulder down, getting an arm up, some way to defend themselves. And it's really that initial contact with the post or crossbar. In this case, there was minimal contact with even if she did go directly into it, there was minimal contact with the post. She ended up in the net, and that's not one of the determining factors. It's contact with the post or crossbar without an opportunity to defend themselves. There were a couple of questions about if there was a penalty shot, what our signals would be. And in this case, I would have gone the penalty shot signal first, and then the major penalty signal right after in succession. So you do your penalty shot, then your major cross check immediately following that. And then your partner who had the 4 in the zone would also signal the delay of game penalty. One of the other questions that was asked was if there was a penalty shot, would the delay of game still be called? In this case, the delay of game was called for four in the restricted area. So it was unrelated to a potential penalty shot on the breakaway. I'm not sure, I just saw it coming quickly, but
the penalty shot would have been called as a result of the cross check from behind. So the penalty shot relates to that penalty. It does not have any relation to the delay of game penalty at all. So the penalty shot, 4 minutes, and the delay of game as well.
Mm-hmm. So does that answer the question you had, Haley, or was it more if the 4 in the zone was deemed one that would be cause for a penalty shot, so she intentionally entered? Okay. In that case,
Haley, the answer. Sorry, Rob, go ahead.
Oh, no, please go ahead, Iris.
So because the penalty shot is in relation to the cross check from behind, even if the goal is scored, it has nothing to do with the delay of game penalty. The delay of game penalty still gets served.
Mm-hmm.
Right, exactly. It's 2 separate things.
Okay, anything else to say about this last clip here before we move on to the next one? Yvette, no, it would not, though they're 2 separate things. So Yvette just asked the same question here. If a goal was scored, would that delay of game be nullified? No, because they're two separate things, and the penalty shot is has to do with that major cross check and not the delay of game. And how to signal the major penalty shot would be to do your penalty shot signal first, and then the major penalty signal directly afterwards. Any other questions before we move on from this video here?
Hannah, we're going to make an official out of you yet.
Oh, I know, right? Tamara, you can go ahead and unmute yourself there.
Thanks. I was just going to ask, if you were the official at the net and you're calling this major penalty, and say you were going to call the penalty shot as well, so you've signaled penalty shot, major cross-checking, and you had also seen the 4-in delay of game, and you saw your partner's arm go up, would you signal that, or would you let your partner do that as the one on the free play line?
I think if I saw the 4-in, then I would probably signal it, because I stopped play, and right now all the attention is focused on me because I blew the whistle to stop play. But in light of all the action that was going on, I would be surprised that the person at the net would have noticed the 4-in.
That is fair.
And there was another question about why the penalty shot comes first. And the reality is, under section 20.3, we go through the order of severity of penalties. And the penalty shot is deemed the most severe, so that's the one we'd put at the outset. It would be the most severe penalty.
Okay, anything
And
else?
thanks, Paul, for putting in the chat the rule about the penalty shot not cancel or nullifying any other penalties.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, any last comments before we move on from this clip? Okay, and again, I am throwing this link in the chat for you guys here to kind of help with the rendering. I hope that's helping a little bit. And we're going to move on to this clip here with Ontario and Quebec then.
Yeah, look for a really good chance. And creative opportunity here by this line. McLean. Van Dal gets a stick in it, but a penalty coming up as McLean fell hard. And a penalty coming to Quebec. Yeah, and look for a really good chance. And creative opportunity here by this line. McLean. Van Dal gets a stick in it, but a penalty coming up as McLean fell hard.
I forgot how busy that game was.
Craziness. Craziness.
And I think if people have comments that they want to make in the chat, start commenting away.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I like that, Haley.
And I think the other thing that we would like to have people put in the chat is, Quebec got the penalty here. What would be one of your determining factors for Quebec getting the penalty versus Ontario getting a charge?
So we have it coming in here. The blue was not stationary and moved into red.
And I think that's, I like the, I think it was Christy Pushkar that said about the leg. And if you really look at the right leg of that Quebec defender, she quite sticks it out. And it's almost like when she's getting up, she's almost getting up slow, and it's kind of like, yeah, because that hurts.
That's how you blow out a knee. But yes,
Yeah.
there are a few things to look at on plays like this, because certainly we want to look at, did she have a defined position that's given the player who, the ring carrier, time and space to avoid the contact. She certainly makes that sidestep to the right to take away that lane. She also has that right leg that's, arguably stuck out to initiate that contact. And there's also the aspect of, is she in a normal playing stance, or is she got a very wide stance to initiate that contact? All things that can come into play when you're looking at whether it's stationary in a legal position or not.
Okay, anything else to say about this?
And I think when I talk about my where does the wreckage land comment, if blue had a stationary position, she would have gone over backwards. But with the way the Ontario player went, the Ontario player far from, like, she did try to avoid, but then she far from was able to keep her path either, and she ended up spinning out. So it's that whole thing of kind of where does wreckage land that helps us to make that call as well.
And sorry, Richard, are you asking about the pick the Ontario player tries to throw?
Yeah, I believe so. Right here, this pick right here.
Okay. And that you need to look at really what impact does it have? Did the player get around her? The Quebec player still had that opportunity to avoid her, get around her. She wasn't set up behind her, meaning she could be very close to her and still give her that opportunity. It's only when they're immediately behind her that you expect that true time and space. But she was aside, she could be seen. So you're talking a screen situation as opposed to a pick. And in that particular play, the Quebec player just stepped around her to still get at the ring carrier. So that's why we would, although it was very close, there was likely potentially even contact with it. The impact of the pick was minimal, or the screen was minimal, because it was from the side, not set up behind. She had the opportunity to avoid her. And what was the call?
There's a question.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, what was
That's
the
what
call?
I was going to talk about.
I don't remember. My guess is 2 minutes for body contact is what I would guess, but
I believe it was body. I believe it was body.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, anything else to be said here, or comments or questions about this clip here? We're going to move on to the next one. Iris and Rob, we are getting close to time, and I think we only have 2 more clips here left. This one is the one that I think the angle wasn't as good. So should we move on to this one? Does that sound good to you guys? Is that the preference?
Yeah, I like the charging one.
Perfect, sounds good. Okay, we're moving on to this video here. Again, link is posted in the chat. And here we are.
And make sure that they're making and make sure that they're making a good break. Oh, good job. Oh, yeah, and that is going to be called on Manitoba for a charge. Make sure that they're making a good break. Oh, good job. Oh, yeah, and that is going to be called on Manitoba for a charge. And make sure.
So how to just play it slower, if you could.
Sounds
Mike?
good.
And I think this is a good demonstration that really although there was some minimal movement from the Saskatchewan players, it doesn't, when we say that they have to be stationary or a defined position, it doesn't mean they have to be absolutely still, but they have to have their position determined. There was no place for that Manitoba player to go other than she just decided to go straight through them. So although their skates are still minimally moving, there was no hole for that Manitoba player to go through. And that's something we want to look at is, was there a hole there for the player to go through that gets crunched down and taken away? Or was there really no place for the player to go and she just puts her head down and goes straight through? In that particular case, there was no space and she just decided that I'm going there anyway, and I'm just going to barrel through both of them.
And I'll use my "where did the wreckage land?"
Go Buffalo.
Okay, so we are running super close on time here, which I actually didn't think would have been the case. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pause this clip for now. And if people would like to spend like 2 minutes, because we're super tight on time here, I will leave the session open a little bit after the session. If anyone wants to stay on and mingle, talk with other refs, ask any questions. Iris and Rob may and likely will have to go. They are on a tight schedule and they've been working hard on this for a while, but I would like to open up some raised hands or unmute just for the last one, maybe 2 minutes here for us to kind of have some discussion. There also will be a follow-up question form and that session feedback form, so you guys can refer to that to kind of keep the conversation going. Awesome. It seems like we're just getting a lot of thank yous and stuff like that. Perhaps some future videos on lower level games. That's a good request there, Yvette. Thank you.
And that is something that we're working on, trying to incorporate into more of our regular clinics. I know Paul has put endless hours into building up some resources towards that, but we do think that the videos provide a very different view and makes it much more tangible than some of the slides we've had in the past. So it is very time consuming and a labor of love to try and get through all of the clips and find them that are going to be beneficial. But some that Paul has pulled together have been a GoPro of games he has done, some at varying levels. So we will continue to try and pull those together.
Mm-hmm. And I saw a few people mention in the chat here that they'd like to have like similar sessions to this run in the future. On that session feedback, like that follow-up form that I'll be emailing to you guys can request future topics as well as let us know if you'd be interested in attending a similar session again. So feel free to use that form to kind of let us know like what we can improve on, what you'd like in the future, how it's working. Okay, I do not want to keep Iris and Rob too long, so I'm gonna kind of start my closing off here. So thank you guys so much for logging on for this session. The recording will be available on the Ring at Canada officials website, as well as available through our YouTube. I will also email that out to you guys once it is posted. Please stay tuned for that, as I do have like quite a few videos to post, and right now I'm running on very little hotspot here in BC with not a lot of internet, so it may not be tonight, but I will get that up as soon as I can. I'll follow up with a session resource sheet, which includes these clips, as well as some feedback forms and upcoming registration for future sessions. If you have any questions about anything that is coming up or about this session, please feel free to email me at hannah@ringette. Thank you so much to our speakers, Iris and Rob. You guys did amazing. Just kind of picking up on these clips and just being able to use those officiating brains to kind of dissect them. I really appreciate everyone being on for this session. Feel free to stay on if you have any questions for me, but likely Iris and Rob will be logging off to go enjoy their dinners or their families or their evenings. Thank you guys so much. I'll be logging on if anyone has any questions, but you guys are free to go, and we'll stop the recording here. Thank you guys so much.